Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Crowded Booth Podcast. We appreciate you tuning in on YouTube. If you're listening in on Anchor, Spotify, or Apple Podcast as well, we'd love to see you there. Make sure to like, subscribe, and follow, where we're continuing our college football preview tour. We head down into the state of Florida with Gainesville, Florida, home of the Florida Gators. Alongside me virtually is David Waters. David, appreciate you coming on the show. I know we've been following each other on social media for a while now. We finally got you on, so appreciate you taking the time before this busy college football season starts.
Absolutely busy time, but what I'm geared up for. So we're absolutely ready for it. We haven't seen this Gator team since the Oklahoma game. A lot of other teams had open spring practices. They had a spring game. They've had some open fall practices. Florida's had none of that. So the last time we've seen this team, anybody has seen the team, is dating back to that bowl game versus Oklahoma in the Cotton Bowl. So fans are eager to see their Gators run out of the tunnel next Saturday.
I made the joke, and for our viewers over on YouTube, they'll be watching this and Facebook as well. We have the red and black, which is the color scheme of our show. It was made well before this, and then we obviously have David on with the blue and orange and white of the Florida Gators. David, let's dive right into this Florida team. I know you've covered them for a while now. Obviously, you know a lot about this program. They lost a lot offensively last year, and I think that for regional in the SEC, nationally wise, some people are writing off Florida. In the meanwhile, I got to watch Emory Jones play in high school. I know what the type of talent he possesses. Let's start it off right here. What is your, we'll say, scouting report of what Emory Jones can do? A lot of people think he's just a runner, but the kid can really do a lot of different things in many different ways.
Yeah, true dual threat. And dual threat means running and passing. So, that doesn't mean you're just a running quarterback, but that focus, that part of the game can and will be there for Florida. So instead of, dropping back 40 times a game, they drop back 25 times a game and use your legs when you drop back sometimes as well. So it's going to be a different looking offense, of course, not just because you change at quarterback, but you lose a lot of weapons at wide receiver as well. So it's going to be instrumental on the quarterback now to help carry the offense just a little bit more with his legs until that passing game comes around a little bit. Of course, it's going to take a step back from a Heisman finalist and Kyle Trask and Kyle Pitts and Kadarius Toney out there. And, being able – you would be servicing yourself a little wrong if you didn't use Emory Jones' legs a little bit. So that's a part of the game that just hasn't been there with Kyle Trask, and now you get it with Emory Jones. So, of course, the question is, can he do enough in the passing game so the offense isn't so predictable and easy to defend? So, that's the question right there. We've seen very little of it the last few years. He's been sprinkled in here and there, had a drive here and there. I've cautioned people to going back to that Cotton Bowl game. Don't look at that game for trying to determine how Florida's going to play in 2021. And I'm not even saying look at the other games either. I'm just saying don't use that Oklahoma game as your determining factor for what you want Emory Jones to look like or what the receiver core is going to look like. You get a full off season. He's been preparing as the starter now. You've been able to get a rapport with these receivers. Florida's very deep at running back. He'll have some help at the running back position as well. So it's not going to all be on Emory Jones, but there will be a time when it's 3rd and 6 and there's 4 minutes left in the game. He's going to have to make a play. Can he make it with his arm? Can he make it with his legs? That's the unpredictability of this Florida offense right now with Emory Jones. So we'll see where it goes. It's Dan Mullen's highest, one of, behind Tebow, I think his highest rated quarterback recruit ever. Mm-hmm. It was Dan Mullen's first quarterback recruit at Florida as head coach. Little did we know it would take till 2021 for him to finally get his chance. But here we are. It's Emory Jones' team, Emory Jones quarterback for the Gators right now. So, just some more play with his legs, and we'll see what he can do with his arm. It'll be fine. I think it's just the question is, what is the ceiling of the offense? It'll be good. It's Dan Mullen. It's a quarterback that he can do some things with. But what's the ceiling of it? I think that's still the ultimate question there.
It's going to be a big question, some big shoes to fill in an offense that did very well last season. When you look at Florida and kind of the trajectory of this program, last year for many people was, hey, we beat Georgia. We found ourselves in the SEC championship, and we found ourselves in a New Year's Six bowl game. That's something that's been trending over the past couple seasons. Do you feel like that Florida may take a step back this year just because of replacing some of those pieces? I know that if, winning the turnover battle is going to be huge. That was something they suffered at a little bit last year, some of the miscues. For you, I don't love to get into prediction type of atmosphere, but for you, do they have to take a step back this year? Because I feel like that's kind of the notoriety. Oh, well, when you look up at what's happening in Athens, they have all this, they have the experience, they have all these things. Budding programs like Missouri, Kentucky have been kind of picked over Florida in some type of polls. For you, you've been around the program, you kind of have a heartbeat on what's going on there. How do you see this season unfolding? I know it's a tough schedule, but they do have some talent down there that, like you said, you have Dan Mullen at the helm, anything can happen.
Yeah, it's still a top 10 talent roster overall in college football, and you got Dan Mullen leading that. So, and plus when Dan Mullen was hired, the floor for a Dan Mullen Florida team, 8 wins. I think you penciled Florida in for 8 wins. Just Dan Mullen just be for an off season probably. That's the floor for Dan Mullen. So now you look at when I said the ceiling of the offense, I think you look at the ceiling of the team as well. A lot of that's dependent on the defense bouncing back at the same time. So I get the question. Yes, you're changing quarterback. Yes, you lose an all-time tight end in Kyle Pitts, a wide receiver in Kadarius Toney who caught 70 passes last year, in a defense that has to bounce back because look. The Florida defense, it's not going to be as flashy. It's not going to be as big play capable as it was last year, but the opportunity is there. If the run game's working, you can best bet that play action game is going to be working. There's going to be a lot of one-on-one coverage down the field with these receivers, these big-bodied receivers Florida has. There's some potential for some big plays, but it's not going to look the same as what it looked like last year when you're throwing the ball 40, 45 times a game and you got some big-time receivers coming down with it. It's going to look a little different. So, yeah, I mean, you can see why a lot of people think there's a step back, but it could be successful, just look a little different. Of course, at SEC Media Days, I picked Georgia to win the SEC East. They have a quarterback who looks like he's fitting well into the system toward the end of last year. You expect him to develop and probably take another step at Georgia too. They recruited at a very high level the last 2 years. But now through fall camp, they're still dealing with a whole bunch of injuries. That offensive line still, for whatever reason, they've recruited really well there, but really hasn't lived up to a highly recruited offensive line. So Georgia's still got some questions. JT Daniels, he might get his confidence back a little bit, but I still think he might be a statue back there just a little bit. So you still got to, the injury bug has hit receiver. You hope it doesn't hit quarterback, but I don't want to sit here and also say it's going to take an injury for Florida to win the East. I still think when the game is played in Jacksonville between those two teams, it's going to come down to the winner winning the East. It's probably not going to be decided before then. I think it comes down to that between Florida and Georgia. I think it's a little closer than a lot of people think. To me, it is clear Georgia does have a talent advantage on a recruiting level. Florida's development closes that gap a little bit. Florida's coaching closes that gap a little bit. But when you look at it, Georgia's probably still got a clear edge between the two teams. I admit it, but I do think it's a little closer between the two teams. And then you mentioned like Kentucky and Missouri. Like, if we're going to give a talent advantage to Georgia over Florida, shouldn't we give that same talent advantage to Florida over Kentucky and Missouri? So that's why I don't really get the whole Kentucky love. We've been hearing this whole ever since 2018 when they beat Florida and had a great season. A lot of the same things we're hearing about Kentucky this preseason is what we've heard the last couple of years. And these last couple of years have been a little disappointing when you look at Kentucky, when you look at the end of the season, especially last year. So they change offensive coordinators. They bring a new OC in. Will Levis comes in from Penn State as their quarterback. But for whatever reason, not many people are questioning what the change is going to mean for their offense like they are for Florida's offense. So, when you correlate the dots, I just think a lot of people are tired and bored of hey, it's a Florida-Georgia battle in the East, so they want to go Kentucky, they want to go Missouri. I just kind of caution that a little bit. Yeah, it may be boring, and you may be looking for a change, but it's probably the two teams, Florida and Georgia, that's going to be battling out in the SEC East in 2021.
Like what you said, you have to apply that same standard. But, hey, that's sometimes a product of preview season, preview magazine season. We get that a lot. David, when I look at this schedule, Florida opens up Labor Day weekend, Florida Atlantic at home. They go on the road to Tampa to take on South Florida. And then the first big one that you're going to circle on the calendar is that September 18th. You're Alabama. You at least get them in Gainesville. When you look at this schedule, Florida draws LSU and Alabama out of the East. And we'll see how the scheduling changes for years on to come. Right now, it's just those two they're taking out of the West. When you see this, David, I mean, this schedule, you talk about the team, the talent's there, the coaching's there, and I even applaud you what you said. The development closes the gap on a lot of some of the top-tier teams across the country for Florida. What game do you have scheduled on that calendar? Obviously, Alabama's there, LSU, the meetup in Jacksonville's always there annually. What for you is going to be a good litmus test to see where Florida is as a program?
You look at the first month of that season, Florida doesn't leave the state of Florida. Florida does not travel very, very far at all. They go to Tampa week 2, like you said. It'll be a glorified home game there in Tampa for the Gators, even though it's a USF home game. There's a Florida, not a lot of traveling there the first month of the season. You mentioned week 3, Alabama rolls into town. The game everybody has circled on the calendar for years now will be in Gainesville that week 3. You can point to that game. I'll look at that game in 2020, when those two teams played in the SEC championship game, it showed you how close those teams were. 2021 may show you how close the programs actually are. Florida plays Alabama very, very tough again. Even on the losing end, you can say, okay, well, we know where we're at, but we're not that far. Alabama rolls into Gainesville and stomps Florida, and it's a blowout. You can say, okay, well, we know exactly how far we have to go. We still aren't. Look, not many. There's no shame losing to Alabama. 99.9% of the teams out there are going to lose to Alabama this year. But, at least, as you said, in a way of a litmus test, it shows you how far you are away and how far you still have to go in Dan Mullen's 4th season. But that game, look, the Florida-Georgia game is always that's the top game of every year. That gets you in Atlanta or whatever. But that game doesn't mean anything if you don't beat LSU week 2. 2 weeks before Georgia. They have a bye week in between. You have LSU and Georgia back-to-back, but there is a bye week in between. If you pencil in a predicted loss versus Alabama, there's one conference loss there. You can't have 2 conference losses going into Jacksonville. So that LSU game 2 weeks before Georgia, that's the teetering point for the season to me. I mean, even if you lose to LSU and beat Georgia 2 weeks later, that still might be Georgia's only first conference loss of the year. You still got to hope they slip up somewhere down the line. But if Alabama's your only loss going into Jacksonville and you beat Georgia, well, you got the head-to-head tiebreaker over them, and then you take your chances after that. So that LSU game, we know how dramatic that game is. We know how we know when those two teams get together, how ugly it can be the week of the game and during the game. So when those two teams get together, it's going to me, really be a teetering point for Florida's season, because more than likely they'll have a loss versus Alabama. You can't have 2 conference losses going into that Georgia game.
You talked about it that Halloween weekend where they faced Georgia. They had LSU, Georgia back-to-back with that bye week sandwiched in. David, the schedule, to me, lightens up a little bit after that. You go on the road to Columbia, South Carolina. While I like the hire of Shane Beamer, to me, they've got a long way to go up in Columbia. You take on Sanford, a tune-up, before you take on Missouri, which a lot of people, like you said, have kind of picked them as a sleeper to finish second in the SEC East, and then home versus Florida State. I want to talk about, because I talked about this with the guy from Georgia we were talking with, previewing their season, kind of reinvigorating the out-of-conference rivalry. What is the temperature gauge on fans getting that Florida State game back? Is that something that was really missed last year? I know Florida State has been, not the program they were 5, 6, 7 years ago, but I know this is a big rivalry in the state of Florida.
Absolutely. And look, I mean, Gator fans they missed an opportunity to beat up on FSU again last year. So, if that game would have been at the end of last year, maybe, Florida probably they're probably not on a 3-game losing streak like they are coming into this year. So you probably missed that opportunity. That program has been struggling the last few years, ever since the end of the Jimbo era, going to Willie Taggart. Look, here's the funny thing talking about schedule. Willie Taggart, head coach at FAU, he'll be head coaching in the Swamp the first game of the season, something he never did as Florida State's head coach. He never got that opportunity because they fired him right before that game in his second season at FSU. So, Florida didn't even get a chance to host Willie Taggart. They do get a chance now. But when he was at FSU, they didn't. He ran that program even further into the ground than what he did when they were taking over. Mike Norvell comes in. They struggle again year one. Hit a little recruiting surge, if you want to say, for Florida State this offseason. We'll see if that continues to a season to where I still think FSU will struggle a good bit this year. Open up with Notre Dame, close with Florida. So, you got that sandwiched in between Clemson as well. So it's going to be a tough schedule there for FSU just with those 3 teams alone. But Gator fans did miss just beating up on FSU again last year. They expect to do it again this year in Mike Norvell's second year. So, he was a first-year head coach last year, dealing with COVID, dealing with everything you had to deal with the first-time head coach. I think he's a good hire, but you just kind of wonder how far back they were when he took over, and can you dig out of that? And if they're going to give him the time to dig out of that. So I think that's the biggest question for FSU. There's a lot of big culture change going on there right now. It may take a little bit longer than the FSU fans want, but that game, if Florida, no matter what the record is, Florida still hates Florida State, and they'll out there and take them, beat them 50-0, no matter, and won't feel sorry for it at all.
No, I know we're all ready to have those big time out of conference games after last season, especially those rivalries that. I mean, this was a rivalry between Florida and Florida State, was one of the top nationally. I mean, it's in a lot of it's funny. I talked to some younger people. They're like, oh yeah, I mean, Florida's good, but Florida State. I'm like, no, this rivalry 10, 15, 20 years ago was one of the best in the country.
You talk to kids now, going back. If you told them Florida, Tennessee, and Florida State were big time rivals back in the 90s, they never would believe you right now.
Never, especially Tennessee. Tennessee. That's a good one. We do have a Tennessee preview coming up, so I'm going to have to let the guy know that we're talking with about that as well. David, we stay with the coaching staff on Florida's side. Todd Grantham has been someone that has been he's well-traveled in the SEC. He's well-traveled in his career. I know parts of Gator Nation were kind of ready to cut ties with him, but there's a lot of talent, I feel like, defensively coming back and through the transfer portal. To me, especially on that front seven, which is very physical. You have Zachary Carter. You have Brenton Cox Jr., but you also add in Daquan Newkirk from Auburn and transfer tackle Antonio Shelton. What is the vibe that you feel like from the defensive coaching staff about what they have personnel-wise, especially in that front seven? I know they've got some stuff to replace on the back end, but that's a pretty dominant physical front seven that I think is going to see some depth increase as well.
Yeah, Florida's been known as DBU for years. You go back last year, you definitely won't say that. And you look at this year, they'll be led by that front seven. And you said the two transfers there. Antonio Shelton, probably for everybody out there, did change his name to Antonio Valentino. So everybody, that's one big change. He let us know a couple of weeks ago when he spoke to the media the first time. So a change there. But yeah, I mean, the big thing about those two guys were, and it's so important for Florida, when Florida did play better on defense last year, it was because guys could play in a more natural position. You had Zachary Carter. He didn't have to play defensive tackle. He played defensive end. Brenton Cox didn't have to play defensive end. He could play outside linebacker, buck. But a lot of times they were splitting reps between those two positions last year. And now with the addition of the two transfers, it allows Zachary Carter to solely focus on defensive end. He doesn't have to play defensive tackle. Brenton Cox can now stand up and be that buck. So everybody's playing their more natural positions. It gives five-star defensive tackle Gervin Dexter, who played as a true freshman last year, it gives him somebody to help rotate in now. So you got a really deep rotation there between two highly regarded transfers right now and Gervin Dexter there at defensive tackle. It's going to help the whole defensive front there for the Gators. And they expect to be led by that defensive front to help that secondary. I think they like what they have at linebacker too. Ventrell Miller's an all SEC linebacker. Mamu Diabate, who it took a little while to come around because it was his first time ever playing linebacker. We talked to him a couple weeks ago. He said, look, I didn't even know how to backpedal as a defender. He goes, I rushed a quarterback in high school. I rushed a quarterback my first year at Florida. I had to learn how to backpedal as a linebacker. And you could see as the season went along last year, and you go back to the SEC championship game, there's a highlight where he gets juked out by Najee Harris. But besides that, he had a pretty good game. He was putting it together by the end of the year. And I think Florida likes what they have there in the linebacker spot. They got some depth there with some young players, Tyron Hopper, Derek Wingo, that are coming along as well. But of course, the big question is the secondary. Can they improve? Can they basically? And I know it sounds basic, but it starts with just communicating. There's a lot of guys who played a lot of football, not Todd Grantham defense last year, and they looked completely lost. And there was a lot of guys who played a lot of football, and it just mystified you. Like, why in the world can they not get lined up? This is not a new defense. So maybe it was COVID. I mean, COVID hit everybody, but I think Florida just did not adjust well for that, and it really, really showed. And Mullen has mentioned it a couple of times. He mentioned it at SEC Media Days. He mentioned it to us again this week. They had a lot of independent contractors there on that back end, guys that were just looking out for themselves, trying to make the big play, trying to make the highlight play, no more so than Marco Wilson throwing a shoe after the tackle versus LSU last year. I mean, you had that type of stuff, and those guys stayed out there a whole lot. So not a lot of new young faces back there. Florida took a hit there. Jaden Hill was probably going to be that starter, that second cornerback spot opposite Kyer Elam. He went down with a torn ACL, a different ACL that he tore in high school. So you feel for him, he can't really stay on the field. But you have five-star true freshman Jason Marshall fighting for that second cornerback spot. Avery Helm coming in, who's really come along and give a lot of competition there. Trey Dean, who came along as safety last year, he's going to be back there on the back end at safety. He improved as the year went on. You're probably looking at Rashad Torrance on the other safety. He started a few games last year for the Gators. So a lot of it's just youth. They're going to have to bring a lot of youth up this year. And that used to not be a problem for Florida. It didn't matter who was back there. You knew if they were a freshman, if they were a sophomore, junior, or senior, if they were playing, you know they were good because Florida had a ton of competition back there, and they went out there and proved themselves. There's still a little bit of question now if you're playing youth if they're going to be ready for it. So that's just something where this defensive front's really going to have to help that back end come along as the season progresses.
Obviously, it's a defense that, like you said, over the past 5-6 seasons was the calling card. Kind of before I felt like they got Kyle Trask in that quarterback situation figured out. But as we get ready to close here, I want to give the opportunity. I know you've probably done this on your show or through some avenues as well. What are one or two X factors for you this season? What has to happen in order for Florida? Maybe it's to get back to Atlanta. Maybe it's to hoist the SEC championship trophy, or at least just get back to a New Year's Six game. What has to happen this season to consider it a success for the Gators?
Yeah, I'll give you one on each side of the ball. On the offense, they got to be able to run the ball better. For as exciting as the offense was last year, Florida, and Dan Mullen even said, yeah, we were efficient running the ball last year. No, you weren't. I mean, I'm sorry, you weren't. You couldn't close out games. Florida would still win games by double digits, but, it just still felt more uncomfortable than it should have been because Florida just could not run the ball. I mean, now don't get me wrong. They chose to pass the ball a whole lot because of what you had. You had Trask, Tony Pitts, wild run the ball. But there were times when they needed to run the ball. They couldn't run the ball. But now this year, you're 5 deep at running back. Florida's so deep at running back now there. And now you got a retooled offensive line that I think John Hevesy, for, Gator fans can, we can slam him all we want to the last couple of years. I still think this type of offense with a running quarterback suits his development just a little bit better as well. I think, it's going to be different moving forward 40 times a game instead of backpedaling and pass blocking 40 times a game. I think it suits what he develops and recruits for. So I think, and look, even when Emory Jones would come in last year and the whole stadium, everybody on TV knew he was coming in to run the ball, he still averaged almost 7 yards a carry. So there's an element of the offense right there that I just think instantly is better for this run game. I think it opens up for the running backs as well to help along with that. But so that's the biggest question, biggest X factor. Emory Jones is going to have some help from the running game and these Florida running backs and the offensive line. On the other side of the ball, they got to get some turnovers. I know it's sounds basic, sounds easy to kind of point out, but there was the longest time last year. Gervin Dexter, the defensive lineman, true freshman I was talking about, he got an old interception versus Ole Miss. I think he was the only defender. And we're talking about a defensive lineman who had an interception for the first 4 games, I think. So Florida's just got to get better there at creating turnovers. We've heard about it a little bit in the scrimmages. I've heard Jason Marshall's name, that 5-star true freshman I'm talking about at cornerback. He's been getting some interceptions there in the scrimmages. So you hope that's been a point of focus there. Communication from the snap of the ball is better. So these guys are in position to make some plays there on the defensive side of the ball. But yeah, run the ball better on offense, get some turnovers on defense.
Yeah, like we said, defensively, we talked earlier about communication. You feel like if these guys have a little more confidence in the scheme and what they know what they're doing, that's kind of going to be one of those products. David, we appreciate you coming on, man. First off, before we let you go, I want you to be able to talk about who you are kind of and what you do and where people can find your work.
Yeah, Gators Breakdown podcast. You can find it on YouTube, every major podcast platform out there. Been doing it for 5 years now, so our 5-year anniversary, our 5th season going into it, covering the Gators. It's blown up more than I ever could imagine there. So love doing it. It's a big passion of mine, just talking Gators. You can find me on Twitter at GatorDave_SEC, and about when football season rolls around, 3 episodes a week there covering the Gators. So, and if I even feel it, maybe even more. So we'll see where that goes. But plenty of coverage for the Gators coming up this fall.
Well, I know we're excited to get back to some sense of normalcy, especially with this season. A full slate, and hopefully it's going to be a fun season. I know we have some big marquee matchups throughout all of college football. David, we appreciate it as always. Thanks for coming on, and we'll have to get you on again to maybe preview some of the big matchups.
Absolutely.